John and welcome to SG Global News from the recrowning of the iconic 1817 statue of Our Lady of God at the Basilica of Notre Dame de la Garde to Egypt's approval of license for 160 additional churches. We have many stories to cover. In Marseille, France, preparations are underway for the recrowning of the iconic 1817 statue of Our Lady of the Garde at the Basilica of Notre Dame de la Garde. The statue, affectionately known as the Good Mother, has been restored over the past month, with its crown undergoing gilding and guard. Visitors will have the right chance to watch the gilding live before the crown is placed back on the statue on October 17th.
The crown of the 9,796 kilogram statue of Our Lady of the Garde in the Basilica of Notre Dame de la Garde will be returned to the Blessed Mother on October 17th, following a month-long restoration. The basilica, which overlooks the city of Marseille in France, is the city's most iconic symbol and its most visited site. The current basilica stands at the highest natural point in Marseille on a site where a chapel was first erected in 1214. Construction of the present basilica began in 1852 under Bishop Monsignor Eugene de Mazenod, and it was consecrated in 1864. The statue of Our Lady of the Garde, affectionately known by locals as the Good Mother, was created in 1870 by sculptor Eugene Lequin and has stood atop the bell tower ever since. The basilica underwent extensive renovations over a decade, beginning in 2002. The restoration of the statue of the Virgin Mary and Child Jesus has been underway for over a month. Skilled artisans have completed the restoration and gilding of the statue in gold. The crown was removed from the 9.72-meter tall Virgin Mary after more than 150 years and taken to Ain province for restoration. It has now returned to the basilica, where it will be on public display on October 11th and 12th. The gilding work on the crown will begin on October 13th, and visitors will have the rare opportunity to watch the process. On October 16th, the fully restored crown will be exhibited before being placed back on the statue on October 17th. Extensive preparations have been made ahead of the recrowning, which will be carried out with the assistance of a helicopter.
Shock and disbelief at St. Peter's Basilica as a man partially undressed on the main altar before a crowd of pilgrims on Friday afternoon. The incident, which comes amid the Jubilee celebrations, has sparked outrage among the faithful and renewed criticism of Vatican security.
On Friday afternoon, October 11th, an incident shocked the faithful visiting St. Peter's Basilica when a young man climbed onto the main altar and partially undressed. Although no Mass was being celebrated at the time, thousands of pilgrims were present to take part in the Jubilee celebrations and to cross the Holy Door when the incident occurred. According to reports, the man, believed to be in his mid-20s to 30s, crossed the altar's threshold before removing his trousers and underwear. The news was first reported by Celere Non Possum, a news portal dedicated to the Holy See and the Catholic Church. As per their report, the Vatican gendarmerie and security personnel intervened after several minutes, by which time the act had already taken place. This is not the first such incident at the Basilica. In 2023, a man stripped completely naked and stood on the main altar to protest against the war in Ukraine, and in February this year, another man climbed the altar and knocked down the candelabras. The latest incident and the apparent laxity of the security personnel has deeply disturbed the faithful in attendance and drawn widespread criticism from observers and churchgoers alike.
Washington State has agreed not to require Catholic priests to report abuse revealed in confession, bringing a legal battle over a controversial state law to a close. Under a settlement reached, the state officials consented to a permanent injunction preventing enforcement of the law in cases involving the Catholic sacrament of confession and/or any other privileged communication.
Washington State have agreed to back off the controversial effort to force priests to report confessions of abuse, putting an end to a legal battle over the new state law. A motion filed in Federal District Court on October 10th confirmed that state and local governments would no longer attempt to require priests to report child abuse disclosed during the Sacrament of Reconciliation. In a press release, the State Attorney General's office shared that the clergy would remain mandatory reporters under state law, but prosecutors prosecutors would agree not to enforce reporting requirements for information clergy learned through confessions or its equivalent in other faiths. The agreement ends a controversial effort by Washington state officials to override one of the Catholic Church's most sacred and inviolable doctrines. Mark Rainsy, president and CEO of Becket Law, which helped represent the plaintiffs, stated on Friday that the agreement was a victory for religious freedom. He shared that this outcome is a win for both religious liberty and basic common sense. No priest should be ever put in a position of choosing between violating sacred vows or facing imprisonment. Washington revised the mandatory reporting law earlier this year, signed by Governor Robert Ferguson, added clergy to the list of mandatory abuse reporters in the state, leaving the priests out of the privileged communication, an exception afforded by other professionals. The state's bishop succeeded in halting the law in federal court in July. In his July ruling, District Judge David Estudillo stated that there were no question that the law infringed upon the free exercise of religion. The judge wrote that in cases where priests hear confessions involving child abuse or neglect, the law forces them to choose between adhering to the religious obligations or breaking the law. Alliance Defending Freedom senior counsel John Brush stated that the Washington was targeting priests by compelling them to break the sacred confidentiality of confession, which ranks as a religious discrimination. The Washington State Catholic Conference on Platform X noted that the church leaders in the state consistently supported the law's broader goal of strengthening protection of minors. In every other setting than the confessional, the church has long supported and continues to support the mandatory reporting. Long before the law was passed, Spokane Bishop Thomas Daly assured Catholics in the state that priests would choose imprisonment over breaking the seal of confession.
Venezuelan Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Corina Machado dedicated her award to the Venezuelan people and former U.S. President Donald Trump, praising his support for democracy, hailing Trump's sanctions, and backing of Venezuela's opposition. Machado urged continued global solidarity against Nicolas Maduro's regime, calling the honor a symbol of hope and freedom.
Venezuela's newly crowned Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Maria Corina Machado, has publicly dedicated her award to both the Venezuelan people and U.S. President Donald Trump, praising his decisive support for her country's pro-democracy struggle. In a post on X, Machado stated, "I dedicate this prize to the suffering people of Venezuela and to President Trump for his decisive support of our cause." She added that Venezuela stands on the threshold of victory, urging the U.S., Latin American nations, and the global community to continue supporting their fight for freedom. The Nobel Committee recognized Machado for her years of courage in opposing authoritarianism under Nicolas Maduro and promoting democratic reform through peaceful means. Machado, 58, has been in hiding since a disputed election widely criticized as fraudulent. Trump, who repeatedly condemned Maduro regime during his presidency, imposed heavy sanctions on Venezuelan officials and publicly backed the opposition movement. In response to Machado's dedication, Trump reportedly thanked her and reaffirmed his unwavering commitment to freedom in Venezuela.
Russian President Vladimir Putin criticized the Nobel Peace Prize Committee for not honoring Donald Trump, saying the award has lost credibility. Speaking in Tajikistan, Putin praised Trump's role in recent global peace efforts, including the Gaza ceasefire and Ukraine talks, calling them historic. The 2025 Nobel Peace Prize went to Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, recognized for her tireless fight for democracy and human rights against Nicolas Maduro's regime.
Russian President Vladimir Putin criticized the Nobel Peace Prize Committee for overlooking U.S. President Donald Trump, claiming the award has lost credibility. The 2025 prize was awarded to Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado for her fight for democracy against Nicolas Maduro's regime. Putin, speaking in Tajikistan, praised Trump's efforts to resolve global crisis, calling his recent Gaza ceasefire a striking example of peace is making. Mr. Trump is doing a lot to solve decades-long conflicts, he said, suggesting Trump's work, including Ukrainian peace talks, could be historic. Putin criticized past Nobel winners, hinting at Barack Obama's 2009 award, saying some did nothing for peace, damaging the prize's prestige. Mercado, a prominent opposition figure in Venezuela, was honored for her tireless work promoting human rights and fair elections in Venezuela, often in hiding. Nobel Chair Jorge Warner Friedness lauded her advocacy for judicial independence. Putin noted an understanding with Trump on Ukraine and supported extending the New START nuclear treaty, which Trump called a good idea.
On Sunday, Egyptian Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouly chaired a meeting of the main committee for legalizing the status of churches and affiliated service buildings. During the session, the committee approved the legalization of 160 more churches and service buildings, raising the total number of legalized establishments to 3,613.
Egypt has approved licenses for an additional 160 churches and church-affiliated buildings, marking the 29th round of approval since the government committee overseeing the process began its work in 2017. Nearly a year has passed since the committee's previous round of decisions, where 293 churches were granted licenses. Several representatives of the Egyptian government were in attendance, including the Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouly, who chaired the meeting. Since the 2016 passage of the law for building and restoring churches, which removed Ottoman-era restrictions on church construction, the committee has approved licenses for 3,613 of the 3,730 churches that applied for registration. Cabinet spokesperson Mohammad Al-Homsani stated that the committee approved the legal status of these establishments after examining the most recent assessment reports on the churches and buildings that had applied for recognition. This legalization process is part of the government's broader national initiative to formalize Christian places of worship. To obtain a license, churches must prove ownership of the land and meet structural and safety requirements, including having fire extinguishers on the site. Earlier, it was extremely difficult for churches to obtain a license before the committee took on the task of processing applications. As a result, many congregations had no choice but to worship illegally in unregistered buildings. In certain areas, congregations face the risk of having their churches sealed or demolished by local authorities on the grounds of lacking permits, even if they have already submitted applications. In 2018, the Egyptian government permitted Christians to worship in unlicensed buildings while the registration process was underway. With the 2016 law passed by the parliament in implementation of Article 235 of the Constitution, marked a turning point for the faithful. The law shifted the authority for approving church construction from the presidency to provincial governors, mandated that decisions be made within 4 months, and established a dedicated committee led by the Prime Minister to oversee the legalization of existing unlicensed churches. Under this new legislation, the size and capacity of newly built churches must correspond to the needs of local Christian communities, and all legalized buildings are required to meet civil protection and safety standards.
That's all for today. Until we meet again, God bless and thank you.